Today we have J.D. Stier, Kwame Marfo, and Jim Ngokwe. Three of them are here to provide three different unique perspectives on the issues that we're going to see in this documentary. JD is the director of the campaign Stand with Congo, and Kwame Marfo has vast experience working in development investments across the African continent. And then we have Jim, who is a national of DRC, and he'll kind of give us that perspective of someone who has lived and seen this firsthand. So when we have the panelists, they'll just give a kind of spiel and tell you what their perspectives are on the issues. Afterwards, we'll open up for questions, anything that you want to ask or want to learn about.
I produced this film in part to educate. Sitting here at Google headquarters, I think being cognizant of the impact all of us broadly are having through our technology sector, it's important to be aware. But primary motivation is to really demonstrate the human impact that our previous practices have had on life, and that it just doesn't need to be this way. We can advance our society without having a harmful impact on humanity or the environment. There's lots of examples of this in Congo now in recent years. In 2012, we really focused our activist efforts on Apple and the world's largest device manufacturer at the time, and Intel, the world's largest chip manufacturer, and calling for positive reform, calling for positive change. We organized on 165 campuses that year. Apple's CEO, Jobs and then Cook, and then Brian Kersanich at Intel leapt at the opportunity to do the right thing. They really did. When they became aware of this, these individuals moved their companies in the right direction. And Brian Kersanich at CES in January of 2013 took the stage with Robin Wright, who I had the honor of taking to Congo back in 2011, and she's been a strong advocate for well over a decade for women and girls who are paying the largest price for this in Congo. And Brian announced at CES that every chip they shipped from that moment forward would be Congo conflict-free. Apple, doing what Apple does, said, okay, we want to do the right thing, and then they disappeared for a while. Never heard anything from them again. They came back in 2014 and had the largest publish of their supply chain ever as a big transparency measure for them. So each of these companies took big strides for the right reasons. So your sector is a relatively small player in the minerals trade out of Congo. You heard from strategic minerals and military to heavy machinery, aeronautics, and other sectors, but it's your industry that's leading the way. And your industry is now becoming the role model that us activists get to take when we go now directly talking to mining companies and others. With Google having relatively recently emerged as a leading player, a strong force in the device space, you're off to a phenomenal start, but you also have the opportunity to kind of create a new way to engage on this issue. Being the newest players and one of the biggest players, you can really double down. You can double down on the way in which you're confronting this supply chain issue and how it relates to transparency, government corruption, and the like. I wanted to say three very concrete things that we can do together to have an impact. Number one, signing the petition at standwithcongo.org, which so tech is not alone. We're asking government leaders to make it an industry-wide, minerals-wide effort, so it's not just falling on tech's shoulders. Sharing that petition in your networks. Number two is raising awareness. Stand with Congo is eager to partner with entities. Google would be chief among them to raise awareness in Congo and internationally. This is our 116th screening event in 17 countries in just under a year. We launched together. We were all together on May 16th at the Tribeca Film Center to launch this campaign. 116 events, 17 countries later. We've met from LSE and Oxford to Colombia and inside Congo and throughout Belgium and from Jakarta to Cyprus to Tel Aviv. The world is very much paying attention to tech, minerals, but getting beyond that, how we, as millennials, as leaders, can use technology, can use our platforms, can use our resources through our employers to raise awareness, to plan events, to plan community engagement events. Third, sign the petition, raise awareness, and I think I'd really love to have conversations with folks here about ways in which we can partner to bring events to schools, to bring events to students, and find a way for Google to speak about the steps it's taking. Private sector solutions are really the way that we're going to pave a new path, and you're going to be hearing about this from our panelists tonight. The last way that we can have a real impact is direct support. I would love at some point for Jim to mention a project that he's piloting through his organization in partnership with Stand with Congo as a way for business leaders to really help boost human capital and capacity in Congo. So from direct support, mentorship to hardware and software, the needs are there. And we have the facility and the connections and relationships to be able to facilitate that kind of direct support. And so looking forward to engaging Q&A with everybody online. But I'd like to now kick it over to Kwame, who is our international executive producer, who's been a guiding force behind bringing this platform and this dialogue around what are the barriers to entrepreneurship on the continent, Congo, but Africa at large, and what are the ways in which we can better support a more rapid development of the economy. Kwame Marfo.
Can you guys hear me? Hi, thank you, JD, for your kind introduction. So I think it might be helpful to give you a bit of a background and how I got involved in this project. So I got frustrated with events in Africa, and I think the easiest thing to do is to criticize, right? And most of the criticism is often leveled at our leaders. I came to the view that, one, as an instrument of change, criticism is actually a spectacularly blunt one. And secondly, I came to the view that leadership, if you will, the analogy that really comes to mind is a wheel, right? So you have government, the civil society, and there is business, right? So the fact that most governments in Africa don't live up to the expectation should not preclude us from being change agents in business and civil society. And one of my early inspirations was from Nollywood in Nigeria, which by some estimates is the second or third largest employer in Nigeria. So I grew up in Ghana, so I saw Nollywood basically become an economic engine out of nothing. And if you study the industry quite well, most of the people that are actually driving change have very little formal education in filmmaking, but they're mostly, in Nigerian parlance, hustlers who have been able to create opportunities. And Nollywood has been able to thrive in spite of an ineffectual governance apparatus in Nigeria. So my challenge to people like myself with fancy degrees and work titles was, look here, Nollywood is getting things done in spite of the fact that governance in Nigeria is not optimal, in spite of the fact that most of them lack training. What can we do? So we took that conversation further by forming an investment platform called Diaspora Capital, leveraging citizen capital from the African diaspora community, and have been able to mobilize quite a bit of funds, invested in countries in Ghana, Liberia, Zambia, and most recently in Benin. Along the way, in spite of your best efforts, we ran into a number of issues that affected our ability to do business. So I was working on chronicling the challenges that we face as investors and also the businesses we invest in doing business in Africa. And the goal was to convert the lessons into an easily digestible visual format, i.e. a documentary with a case study on the Congo. And that is when I ran into JD and his team, and they already had a well-developed product. So I felt it probably would make sense to work with them as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel. So that's my involvement. And one thing I also want to emphasize is I'm not from the Congo, right? So the question is, why the Congo? Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Halima and the team from Google for giving us this opportunity to be here. We have tried to run this by a number of organizations, including African-focused organizations, and some of them have flat out told us they didn't see any alignment, which I personally have found that quite perplexing. Even from a purely humanitarian perspective, right? 5.4 million people have died from the war in Congo, all right? This is, to put it in context, about 2/3 of the population of New York or London, bigger than the population of Norway, all right? These Black lives matter too. The second point I'd like to raise is the fact that Congo is too big to fail. When I was in grad school, one of the lessons I learned was the best predictor of war in a country is war next door. And looking at the Congo, its destabilizing influence, forces have led to 9 other countries being plunged into one conflict or the other. The other point I'd like to raise also is that strategically speaking, I would argue that Congo is probably the most strategically important, the most strategically important country in Africa, at least throughout history. I mean, if you look at the main events that have shaped our global economy, Congo has had a say, starting from the Industrial Revolution. The rubber that was used to power the Industrial Revolution was sourced from the forest in the Congo. Looking at the First World War, 75% of the brass casings that came from the war were sourced from the Congo, going down to the Second World War. The uranium, up to today, in the coltan and cobalt that are used to power mobile telephony. So the misfortune with the Congo is its knack for producing the right resources at most critical times have led to a bit of a scramble for its resources, starting with the European colonialists, to the actors in the Cold War, to most recently local insurgency groups. And lastly, the reason why I think the Congo is important and why we should all care is I think there is an existential crisis, not just in Congo, but in most of Africa, which is the lack of jobs. There aren't too many examples of countries moving from grinding poverty to emerging or developed country status without having a manufacturing base. And the reason why Africa's industrial hub hasn't taken off, in spite of the fact that we have a number of advantages, is due to the fact that we don't have access to electricity at an affordable price. And Congo has the resources. I mean, the Congo River itself has the potential to generate up to 100,000 megawatts of electricity. That's 13% of the world's hydroelectric potential. And the beauty of the Congo River is, unlike most river basins in Africa, which tend to dry out during the dry season, the Congo River, the drainage basin sits north and south of the equator. So at any given time, a part of it experiences the rainy season. So the only way we could realize Congo's potential is to create this environment to bring the best out of it and its people. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. And Kwame and I have been doing these events all around the world for the better part of the past year. And we are proud to stand in solidarity, but give respect for the Congolese people for whom this is their struggle. And Kwame and I have found many ways in which we attempt to be supportive. But now let's take a back seat and introduce Jim, business leader from Congo, and actually just returned from a trip, who has ushered in some amazing new ideas and progresses. But really, in my opinion, is a phenomenal example of the hope of the future, the hope of this new generation, and millions of young Congolese ready to reap the benefits.
Thanks for the intro, JD. So my name is Jim Ngokwe. And just to give you a quick background on how I got involved, I'm on the management team for an organization called Young African MBAs. And despite our name, you don't have to be young, African, or have an MBA to be a member. That was just the characteristics of our founders. And basically, we formed a partnership with Stand with Congo earlier this year, just trying to figure out ways to raise awareness of this film. And most recently, we're in talks right now to talk about how we can really, beyond just raising awareness of the film, having also more of an impact on the ground through mentorship for entrepreneurs. So that's something we're piloting right now. We're going to get started very soon. And as JD and Kwame mentioned, I'm from DRC. So I'm very aware that, if it wasn't for, who my parents and grandparents are, I could have been one of these victimized kids. So this makes me even, try even harder to find ways to make a difference in the country. Because beyond the fact that it could be me, just, even if I wasn't from Congo, I still feel like it's, from a humanitarian standpoint, it's not right. I know life isn't fair, but there's some things that we shouldn't tolerate as people living here. So I just want to do what I can to, help change things and really help empower the next generation so that in 20 years, there isn't, the next JD coming up with another movie about the plight of the Congolese people, that things are actually moving forward and there's progress and there's hope. So that's how I got involved. And thank you guys for watching, and thanks for Lima for, making this happen. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming out, Halima, Google, and let's open it up for Q&A, but could you please come to the microphone because we're going to be streaming, and so please ask any questions that you might have into the microphone. And we'd love to talk about what's happening on the ground. We'd love to talk about entrepreneurial and business opportunities. We'd love to get an update on the political situation. So whatever curiosities you may have, please, whether it's online in chat or on the microphone, we're looking forward to engage.
Hi, I don't really know much about Congolese politics, so I would love to. I think I had trouble following along because it was pretty complicated. I guess the current president, his term expired last year, but it was extended. What was the constitutional mechanism through that allowed that to happen, and what's going to happen? I mean, I think they had a new constitution in 2006. Are they going to have another new constitution? Thanks.
So there was no real constitutional mechanism for the lack of elections. Literally 4 months before it happened, they were like, there's no budget for elections, they're not going to happen. So that really pretty much is what happened. They said, we have no money to finance elections, we need to do a new census, so let's just put this on hold for a little bit. And then, there was some stress of riots, so they, the opposition, met with the powers that be, and they talked about, they found, I guess, a temporary plan, whereas Kabila could be the interim president until the next elections. That was supposed to happen, this December. But I was there in April when I asked, if it's going to happen, people laughed. So basically, I think there's a consensus that elections are not going to happen this year, but everybody's aware that they should happen. So just a matter of, I guess how far they're willing to hold on to power and what they're willing to do to make sure the elections never happen. But really, there was no mechanism. Really, I guess they just strong-armed it, if we're going to be honest.
Trevor Noah said that Kabila found a really easy way to stay in power, and it's to not hold elections. And there's some very stark similarities between the United States government today and the Congolese government and this kleptocratic form of rule where you enrich yourself and your immediate family members and buy off or intimidate or suppress the opposition. Kabila's tactics are starting to look very similar in our own White House. In addition to, I'd say, since December 19th, when President Kabila ignored his constitutional mandate to leave the presidency, he's been buying off the more prominent opposition members. And so at a time when the elite are consolidating power and increasingly suppressing, Stand with Congo had recently released a series of videos of young, nonviolent pro-democracy activists. Many of them are individuals your age who've graduated with law degrees and medical degrees, and there are no economic opportunities for them at home. They have decided to join a social movement, which looks very akin to Black Lives Matter here, very akin to the anti-apartheid movement, the civil rights movement in this country, and are calling out for elections. They're getting increasingly organized throughout the country. And so what we're hoping to support is really this confluence of factors of the elite consolidating power, but a growing sentiment demanding elections. And with the youth movement throughout country, active in 6 provinces, there is still some hope that given the fact that Kabila is extremely unpopular broadly throughout the whole country, that if the public can be tapped into by those brave enough to take action, that there is yet hope this year. And so we all are engaged in standing in solidarity and supporting the youth movement, as are local church leaders, a voice that's necessary to show unity, the few remaining opposition MPs that have not been bought off by Kabila, and civil society. Congo has one of the strongest and most developed civil societies on the continent and in the world, and they've been increasingly organized and effective in recent years. And there is a lot of courage to speak out about corruption throughout the Congo. And so there is some hope, and there are individuals in the country that we've worked with that are leading that charge and trying to raise up that message of hope for their countrymen and women.
Hi. Thank you very much for coming to give this screening. My question is, how much of a record trail is available for where the minerals are going and who's benefiting from them? I know you mentioned Apple and a couple other tech companies that have done their research to try to find out how they're connected to the minerals in Congo and to make changes. But how much of a record trail is there that is accessible? I feel like that'd be a really good place to start to surface that information and show the culpability of all the players in the tech industry, including all of us, by the way, because we are consumers of tech products.
On our website, standwithcongo.org, we have reports that have extensive documentation. We have some leading organizations from Kofi Annan's Africa Progress Panel to Global Witness, really the world's leading transparency organization. Both of these are NGOs, civil society organizations. If you really plug into the news, you'll remember about a year ago there was a scandal called the Panama Papers. And so it was a legal entity in Panama that set up myriad offshore bank accounts for corrupt business dealings. And President Kabila, his sister, and many of his family members showed up in those documents. And so there was a real watershed moment for having it in writing and seeing some of the ledgers. But if you go to our website, you're going to get to see from Africa Progress Panel to Bloomberg to Global Witness and others the paper trail. And there are some groups that have done amazing research and documentation. Bloomberg's led the way. Global Witness has used much of their reporting to enhance their reports. And locally here, there's an NGO in Washington, D.C. called the Enough Project. And there are individuals within your corporation that are working with Enough Project to show the steps that Google is taking. And I worked at the Enough Project from 2011 to 2014 while I was producing this film. And I was leading the consumer tech conflict-free push that resulted in Apple and Intel and some others taking some big steps. I spoke with my colleagues who continue that work and continue to rank the world's leading tech companies. And they had good things to say about Google, but this will be the very first time you're included in those rankings, which are set to come out in the near future. And so those are some great resources, and all of those organizations and all of those resources are published on our website, standwithcongo.org.
And I would add, so there's actually a longer version of this documentary, which you can watch on Netflix, which highlights a number of other entities. So it's not just tech. Looking at Congo has virtually almost any resource that you could think of. You know what I mean? So you have countries like Rwanda, which has over the couple of years been sort of, raiding Congo every now and then. So it cuts across various sectors. There are multiple state and non-state actors involved. And that actually feeds into the title for the documentary, which is when you have different players, heavyweights, fighting over resources. The little ones are the ones whose rights get trampled upon. So it's across from mining to you name it. Everyone has had a stake in the Congo historically and now. But there is a ton of information available that we're happy to share with you on the back of this documentary if you're keen on helping follow the trail and join in this advocacy movement to promote transparency in mining in the Congo.
Hi, thank you for coming to share your time and your information with us. So I was curious about what's whether there's been any progress on the government or policy side where these minerals are going, because I can imagine how hard it is to change things in Congo because there's still a lot of flux there. But has there been any progress over the years in terms of countries where the minerals are going, creating policies to actually prevent minerals coming in from places where they're sourced illegally?
Is this specific to the Congo only, or?
Well, it's specifically to the Congo in this context, but also just generally.
I can speak to Congo, and I can speak to Africa or the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely.
So have countries like the U.S. or Belgium or
sure, I'll touch on Congo specific, and then Kwame can broaden it to the continent resources at large. You saw early on in the film, which is available on Netflix, so please feel free. I think if you're asking people to sign a petition, just include a link to the film. They can watch it on Netflix, but it's also available worldwide on Amazon, so we just want it to get out there for free or for a couple of bucks to anyone who wants to learn about this issue, is willing to kind of hear what you've been learning about today. In the film, they really broke down, which is a very complex sector and one of the largest mining sectors on Earth, into the east of Congo and the south of Congo. And as you heard, the human atrocities are unparalleled in the east. Conservative estimates say that over 6 million people have died since the 1996 war in the east, and many experts agree it's many millions more. There's myriad armed groups, dozens of semi-autonomous armed groups. Yes, a few of the biggest, most well-funded groups are Rwandan-backed. Uganda plays a role in that as well, and the Congolese elites have a role in some of those groups as well. In that melee of competing armed groups, the humans on the ground are the ones paying the price for that. And they use sexual violence as a tactic of war, intimidation, child soldier recruitment, and other human atrocities, mass atrocities, to control those mineral areas. Now, the human rights push originating in Congo with youth movement leaders that I mentioned, Lucha is the French acronym Fight for Change, is an entity that's really been leading the push for transparency and for better governance on the ground. They've been joined by Congolese living in the diaspora and international citizens in solidarity. And this is where this large push since 2010, 2011 has resulted in some of the world's major tech companies taking aim. And by having Intel, Motorola Solutions, and others actually go visit with mineral mining rights associations and Congolese civil society organizations, whereas 5 years ago there were no certified mines in the East, there are now many dozens of certified mines in the East. Where I was there in January with our film team, and we visited one of the largest mines in eastern Congo. There's a minimum wage, there are safety requirements, there are labor requirements, there are no more children working in the mines, and you're seeing this type of operation spreading in the East, and it's happening because there's solidarity, because you have some large purchasers in the West, like yourselves, joining coalition, joining conversation, Congolese-led solutions on the ground. There is no shortage of Congolese entrepreneurs that want to do sustainable, long-term, and safe business. It's the corruption and the armed groups that get in the way. But when you have a critical mass of stakeholders come together, the unity is strong enough where they can pilot and now flourish with conflict-free models. This extends beyond mining in the East. There's a Congo Coffee Peace Project. A former rebel commander, General Kasongo, is now a part of a 2,500 person strong fair trade coffee operation, which fills up a large Masisi area of the Masisi province north of Goma. This is 2,500 men that used to be in local armed groups that are out now all working in the coffee trade, fair trade coffee trade. There's almost no violence and no theft in Masisi anymore, and everybody has a reliable full-time income. And so this push and really the need for some international solidarity, and not just civil society leaders and business leaders like ourselves, but corporations and powerful entities showing an interest changes the dynamics. I remember getting a call from Fidel Bafi-Lemba, a prominent activist featured throughout the film, one of the leading experts on mining and transparency in the East. Gave me a call shortly after the Intel presentation at the Consumer Electronics Show in January 2013 and said that he got a call from one of the most notorious armed commanders in Congo and said, Fidel, I know you're working with these people in the West and these companies. If someone wanted to hire me and my men to be like a security contractor, we're open for that. And so even from who we would want to call the bad guys, of which there's nothing that simple and nothing that black and white, and from many child soldiers and armed commanders and soldiers that I've met and gotten to know their stories pretty well, a pretty common scenario is your mother is raped, your father is killed, and you're recruited. And so when we take a look back at the influence and the corruption, it's just not black and white and good guys and bad guys. It's much more complex and nuanced than that. And the one uniting factor and a real strong reason for hope is development. It's business development, it's transparency, and it's having a reliable, safe way to make your livelihood. And the appetite is so strong. Now it gets to the other part of my answer to your question, and that's kind of some of the good news in the East. The South, where Bloomberg analysts referred to as the real money, the billion-dollar deals. That's handled by Kabila and his regime, Jekamin, the state mining industry. Very little signs of progress, and I'd just almost love to say no, there's no progress. Global Witness, British-based transparency organization that you can find through our website, continues to document instances of multi-million-dollar bribes from Glencore, which is based in the UK. If you look in, some of their major shareholders are our own American-based retirement funds that we select for our 401ks. There's a lot of pressure we could put, especially through shareholders, on Glencore. Glencore is one of the major financiers of the Kabila regime, his family, maintaining the status quo of corruption. Congo, in just a couple of years, looking at just a few deals, the Congolese people lost over $1 billion to corrupt deals, whereas President Kabila would personally get a bribe in the millions of dollars and then sell off Congolese mining concessions at billions under market value. That practice continues today, and it's what many experts agree is the reason why he's ignoring the Constitution and is relatively immune from international pressure. He has a virtual blank check. And that's all connected to our mining industry and the minerals that we rely on in our industries and in our lives. And so while public pressure has improved some conditions in the East, and there are an increasing number of certified conflict-free mines and other entrepreneurial ventures in the East, the state as a whole and the sector in the South where the real money has been made, I think is the thing that we need to continue to focus on, and we're going to continue to advocate for and look for increasing partnerships for, but really put pressure on the Western mining companies, Glencore chief among them, to end their support of the Kabila regime and for really being the root of corruption in Congo.
Quickly, so within the continent, I know a number of countries, I know Ghana, for example, recently discovered oil and has been exporting. And in terms of petroleum bills, we actually got a bit of help from Norway in terms of building up our capacity. So on paper, we have some best practices, but in practice, I don't know if you've been following events in Ghana. We're doing really well. GDP growing at 8% for 5 years. We discovered oil and the economy imploded. So when the rubber did hit the tire, the resource infrastructure has been deemed to be wanting. I know countries like Botswana they've done a pretty good job. Senegal recently discovered large deposits of natural resources. There's conversation around doing that. Outside of Africa, I know, so with the last U.S. administration, so during the passage of the Dodd-Frank financial reform bill, so there was a provision in it which basically requested companies doing mining to publish what they pay, which is designed to bring transparency. And U.S. taking that initiative led the EU and Canada, which I believe collectively make up 75% of revenue generated within the sector to also raise the bar for companies operating in these regions to publish what they pay, to expose any corrupt practices. Unfortunately, the new administration here in the United States is looking at reversing this bill. All right. The good thing is, I think this went through Congress, so it cannot be unwound through an executive action. It would have to go through Congress. But we know the current Secretary of State has been in favor of this bill. A good number of the senators on the other side of the political spectrum, well, on the same side as the president, are also not very much in favor. So I guess we're in a watch and see mode. We also had a conversation with the UN, UNDP, about 3 weeks ago. And there is a conversation around screening this documentary and what the UN is doing. And part of what really piqued their interest with this documentary is they've been spending a lot of time working with countries that have recently discovered natural resources to help build up their capacity. That said, I think most of the current bills in place have been largely focused on natural resources and how to make the most out of it. Unfortunately, I think the challenge and why I think these bills aren't really working is the focus has been largely on the resources and how to get the best price, how to negotiate. My view, and this is one thing that we've been working JD to get across, is Africa's most valuable resources are not what lies underneath the earth. They're hiding in plain sight, as these people. So to the extent that we could engage policymakers to channel these resources towards investing in the human capital, I think that would be the right way to go. So most of the current conversations have been around setting up sovereign wealth funds, trying to find ways to, increase the bargaining powers, and it's all been resource focused. I think if we could channel the discussion away from, to investing in people, I think that can drive the change and lead to more sustainable growth on the continent.
We're really grateful to have this opportunity and get to speak about a more hopeful future and a way we can work together to achieve that. If there's a small part of you that would be open to exploring a way that you can help out, whether it's signing a petition and sharing a petition, helping raise awareness, explore some innovative ways that we can engage students and youth, if you're interested in that, or if you want to explore ways to give direct support, or you can rally some folks on your team or more broadly here for some direct support, please take my card before you leave the room. We're really grateful to have that opportunity for all of you watching and online, and for those of you here in the room, thank you very much. And we want to just have some closing remarks from Jim. So thank you all very much.
Well, again, thank you all for watching this film. And again, as JD said, if you want more information, want to know how you can help further, there's a lot of great resources on the website. Again, I just want to add, again, I was in Congo last month. It was my first time in 19 years. So it was my first time going there as an adult. And basically, one thing that's common in the people you talk to is that there's just frustration, exasperation, because everybody wants to work. People want opportunities, but a lot of time, there's powers that pretty much prevent them from, kind of building their vision of, the Congolese dream, if you'd say. So basically, I just want you to be aware that the Congolese, I think as a Congolese, sometimes you're kind of worried about these documentaries because it's like your people are painted as, helpless folks just looking for help and looking for, outsiders to intervene. And it's not the case, there are Congolese solutions on the ground. There are Congolese who really want to work, but there are powers that be a lot of times, from, very wealthy interests with big money, real money, that really would be hurt by Congo taking control of its resources. So there's a lot of major interests at heart. So it's really important that to kind of just also be aware that the Congolese, I just want to make sure that people don't leave this thinking, poor Congo, I feel bad for the Congolese, they're in really bad shape. There are some problems, but there's also a lot of pride there. And as Congolese, we definitely want to make sure that perception of us as a poor, helpless bunch of people doesn't exist. That we want to make sure that kind of stops. But that if you want to support that, again, you check out the resources, make sure you understand where your 401k is going, that you make sure that, if you want to support, activists that do that. And also one last thing, specifically to Google, when I was in Congo, basically the American Chamber of Commerce told me that Google will be going to Congo this December. They'll be helping set up some fiber optics, wiring and cables to, make for Wi-Fi connectivity. So again, I don't know how close Google here and Google in Congo works, but basically, I think it would be great if when Google is in the country that they make sure that they employ locals. Because a lot of times foreign companies, they go elsewhere and they just bring their people with them, and they don't have as big of an impact as they could in the local population. So basically, if any of you are interested or are aware of kind of how Google Congo would operate, definitely want to encourage you to maybe talk to your team, talk to your leaders, and make sure that there's a plan in place to ensure that when Google is in Congo, it has as much of a positive effect as it can. Thank you.